When I was a kid, it's amazing all the things I got wrong, with my dad being a pastor of a big church. And when I went to Sunday school with perfect attendance, they used to give you a little round button with all the little ladders below it for perfect attendance. It's amazing how I misunderstood Jesus' teachings. And today's teaching, I promise you, will make an impact for good upon your life. The question is, for me and for you, is are we coachable? And Jesus said this, he who hears my words, you got to hear Jesus first, so you ought to be in the Bible class studying Romans and having your Bible during the week, got to hear his voice, and then hears the words and does them. That's the key. Do we do what Jesus says, or do we, like little Eddie when I was a kid, have our own thoughts of how we should live life? And I have a promise stole. It's made in Guatemala by the natives there, free trade, and it's just the colors of the rainbow. The idea is that there's promises of God for all of us, and this is a really good promise that we have in our Bible reading today. Now, here's my mistake. I'd say Pastor Ed had a lot of mistakes. Well, my mistake was this. I thought gratitude was that warm feeling in my heart that when I received something, I felt good about. And I might be feeling good about sitting down at a Thanksgiving dinner, feeling nice and warm inside, or Christmas morning, opening presents or something. Anyway, it's sort of like a feeling within. But Jesus has a different teaching on gratitude. Gratitude is such a key. Now, I want to say that gratitude is, as Shakespeare would say, thrice blessed. And I just love his plays. And in one of the plays, it's about a Jewish banker, and it's kind of anti-Jewish, and it's about a guy who wanted his pound of flesh. And Portia, in this play, The Merchant of Venice, plays a judge. She's in disguise, and as this merchant wants a pound of flesh, literally to be taken from a person he doesn't like, he wants to cut the body open, she makes an appeal to Shylock and says, mercy is twice blessed. It falls from the heavens as a gentle rain, and it's a mark, of a good king. And it goes on to say, it blesses both the giver of mercy and the receiver of mercy. Now, gratitude is thrice blessed, I would say, because if we practice Jesus' teaching of gratitude, how he describes it, Jesus is blessed and he's happy with us. Number two, the person receiving the gratitude is happier. And when we give it, we too are happier inside. There's a blessing three different ways. But what Jesus is really impressed with is when people express gratitude, and that is the point that I missed. I just thought it was that warm feeling. Jesus says it needs to be expressed to somebody else. Now, my problem is this. People have done all kinds of wonderful things for me, and I say, oh, I have that warm feeling inside of me. And I walk along in life, and a day or two later, 3 days later, it's getting kind of old. A week later, a month later, I forgot it. And the point is this, we can forget what others have done and never thank them. And actually, gratitude is kind of rare. I came across a story in the Great Lakes, a ship sank, and there was one hero who went out and rescued like 20 people from that boat and brought them to shore. And he was quite a hero for doing that as the boat was sinking. And they said, do you remember anything? No, it's a big blur, but I remember one thing. Nobody ever came up to me to thank me. Now, you can see how it happens. They're going to the hospital. They're surrounded by family. They might not even know who it was that rescued them. So it's understandable. But you see, gratitude is this. We're going along in life, and we need to stop, assess the situation, and then take a step in a different direction to express that feeling that we have inside. Now, I came across a wonderful book, and this book is called My Most Inspiring Moment. What was your most inspiring moment of your life? Now, Larry McCaskey at the early service gave the correct answer. He said, it was when I married my wife, Marion, sitting over here. No, he had that right. That was the correct answer. Now, there's a person called Bishop Fulton Sheen. When I go to Florida in February, I can hear on Catholic TV, and he's on there a lot. And he's on with a red cape, and he has a blackboard, and he's teaching away. He was from New York City. He had his own TV program years ago in the 50s and did a wonderful job. And I want to share with you his most inspiring moment. A few years ago, this is probably the early 50s or late 40s, I visited a leper colony in Africa. I brought with me 500, I just dropped mine right here, 500 little silver crosses, and one for each leper. To each of the lepers with that dread disease. The first leper who came up to me had only a stump on his left arm. Leprosy had eaten away that arm. And he held it up because it hung on a rosary there as a sign of his faith. Wow. His right arm and hand were full of the telltale open sores of leprosy. The right hand, you can just see all the white spots and the sores, and it's kind of gooey. It's just awful. And he was to give each one a cross. They're all lined up. This is the first one. And he looks at that hand with all those leper sores, and this is what he did. He dropped it in the leper's hand. Now, a little bit later, I'm going to get back why it became inspiring to him, what he did to make this the top spiritual moment of his life. But leprosy is a terrible thing. You've seen that movie, many of you, Ben-Hur, where his sister and mom are living in a cave, and food has to be dropped down to them by rope. People are afraid of the lepers. And in Jesus' day, that was the disease you feared. Because when you got that white spot, you'd hide it. You'd wrap it up and hide it. Then it gets worse. People begin to notice. And then it starts to show up on your hands. And they say, you have to leave your home. You can't come to the synagogue again. And you can't come into the city again. You have to go outside. You are cast out. And it happened on the border between Samaria and Galilee that Jesus is passing through, and there were 10 lepers. Now, it's kind of interesting. When you get close to death, all your old hatreds don't seem to count much anymore. And it used to be the Jews and the Samaritans hated each other. And one time, when the disciples were refused any food in Samaria, the Samaritans had said, you're going to Jerusalem to worship. We hate you. We're not going to sell you any food. And James and John, full of faith, come up to Jesus and said, Jesus, listen to this faith. Command us to bring fire down from heaven and burn up that city. Command us, we'll do it. We got faith. And Jesus is going, oh no, oh no. Can you imagine after the resurrection if they came back and said, sorry about that Samaritan city we burned down, but now we have some good news for you that Jesus loves you? That would not have gone. And the Samaritan church community responded to Jesus. So we have 9 Jews, 1 Samaritan, and in sickness they're together. Hate doesn't matter anymore. They're just slowly dying every day, unlike what Betsy shared about this is the day that the Lord has made, let us rejoice. Every day got worse. And when they beg, they can't get close. It's like from here to the back of the sanctuary, they can't get close because people are afraid. Just like the Ebola thing today. People are afraid, and you can't get close. And you would beg. And then if they dropped in some food, you'd scuttle out there and get your food, and I imagine somehow those 10 shared what little they had as they wrapped their bandages, and one day they're going out, they're shuffling out, they are defeated, they are destroyed, their life is over. But with Jesus, our life isn't over. When I look at Bob Johnson's life, 2 of his kids died. His wife Nadine had died. And he was so down until he met Nancy, and his whole life grew again. But, sometimes we think life is over, but it's not, because of what Jesus can do. It's no secret what God can do. And as that procession comes out, and they recognize Jesus. I thought about that. Now, how would that happen? Maybe they were well when they met Jesus before. It could have been that white robe that made them so distinguished, and somehow they knew it, and they nudge each other. It's Jesus. It's Jesus. And then they got a really good prayer. I'm going to tell you, this is a good prayer. They shouted out, because they're at distance, Jesus. Hey, there's 10 of them shouting. Can you imagine that, 10 of them? Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. Just 6 words. Wow. And they shouted again, Jesus, Master, we're at the rope's end. Have mercy on us. Oh, that's such a good prayer. And then a bad day got worse. Jesus looks at him. And one mark of spirituality, one mark of our spirituality is compassion. Come is with, passion is feeling. You feel for them. And Jesus always felt for people. He feels for them. But he doesn't touch them. He just says, go show yourselves to the priest. They look at each other. What is this? He didn't touch us. They shot. Let's shuffle on back. Shaking their heads, they trudge back. As they rewrap all the sores, the whiteness is going away. What? All of a sudden, they are really excited. And wow, and they're shouting with joy, and they're doing what Jesus said. Jesus said, go show yourself to the priest, because the priest had to certify you before you could come to the city, before you could come home, before you could go worship in the temple again, or the synagogue. You had to be cleared by a priest. Go show yourselves to the priest. And now they're doing it, and they're running, they're happy, they're excited. And one of them, now here's the teaching of Jesus. One of them stops. And he thinks for a second. I'm supposed to show myself to the priest at the Samaritan temple where they worship the golden calf to get certified. The Samaritans worship the golden calf. Stops. He thinks. And this is where it is. He has to take a step in a different direction. He wants to see that priest, but he takes a step. And you see, gratitude with Jesus is a step out of the direction you're going. We could be so busy, so full of things to do, that we don't take the time to make that expression. And he comes back, he falls at Jesus' feet, falls there, praises God, thanks Jesus. And now Jesus has a teaching moment. He's teaching the disciples that, hey, you're Jewish, but we found out that a lot of times the Gentiles have more faith than you do. Like that lady up in Lebanon that when her kid is healed, Jesus is so moved. He says, she has more faith than any of you disciples or anybody in Israel. He's pointing out that the Gentiles have something. And she said, look, disciples, where are the Jewish ones I healed? They're doing what Jesus said. Go show yourselves to the priest. And Dr. Albert Schweitzer, that great missionary to Africa, had said, they were doing what Jesus said. Their hearts were full of gratitude. But here's the problem. If we don't express it, it can become too late. And when they get back and get all that sorted out with their families, because they could say, honey, kids, I'm home. That's a great thing to say. But Jesus is going to Jerusalem too. And he's going to be crucified. So when they go to thank Jesus, all they can do is find him on the cross. Too late. And so gratitude needs to be timely, and it's a step out of the direction we were taking. Now, how about our wonderful Bishop Fulton Sheen? Remember, he drops the cross into the hand because it's gooey. I do the same thing. And then he says this. This becomes his inspiring moment. He's having a spiritual, really a highest spiritual moment of his life. That's what's going to happen out of this. He said this. At that moment, there were 501 lepers in the camp, and the most leprous of all was myself. I had taken the symbol of redemption, the cross, the divine love for man, of the humiliation of the divinity into our poor fallen nature, and had refused to identify myself with all that the symbol represented. It's so easy to love humanity in general, but sometimes so difficult to love a particular person. Now, you know who I'm talking about. Somebody offended you. It's hard to love that person. It's easy to help the lepers, but when one meets a particular leper, then a special effort is required. Seeing myself in the full shame of refusing to identify myself with this victim, I looked at the crucifix in the putrid mass of his hand and realized that I too must become one with suffering humanity. What God's will is? Love yourself. Love others. Can you identify with somebody who's really down and out? Somebody who's been knocked down in life? Then I pressed, now here it gets really good, I pressed my hand to his hand with the symbol of love between us. All that gooey mess. And with the other 499 lepers. And when he did it, he was blessed. It was his most inspiring moment. And that's the possibility. I'm sure the lepers felt really grateful to get a silver cross. But for him, in giving it, he found out the promises of Jesus are right and true, and there's a blessing there. I'm going to close with my favorite example of saying thank you. And we have gratitude stones that we'll have at the back of the sanctuary following worship. If you want to get another gratitude stone, it kind of reminds us to do this. But it was by a college professor at Boston University, and his name was Dr. Bill Steiger. And he also taught homiletics at Boston University. And it was in the Depression years. And he was with some other ministers and other professors, and they were all complaining. Why? It's the Depression. It was awful years. And one minister said this, oh my goodness, the title of his sermon on Thanksgiving was going to be, Thankful for what? This Depression year. Oh my goodness, what a discouraging message that would be. And they discussed, are we thankful for anything? And Dr. Steiger says, yes, there's one person I'm really thankful for. It's a person that introduced me to poetry, to Tennyson, and I became an English professor, and I became a minister with that background. And it was in 6th grade. I think it was West Virginia is where Dr. Steiger came from. Did you ever thank her? No, he never did. Well, Dr. Steiger, why don't you do that? So he writes a letter thanking her. I just love the letter he got back, and I'll close with this. My dear Willie, this is Professor Steiger. My dear Willie, 6th grade. Willie, he had to smile. I remember well your enthusiasm for Tennyson and the Idyls of the King when I read them to you, for you were so beautifully responsive. My reward for telling you about Tennyson did not have to wait until your belated note of thanks that came to me in my old age. I received my best reward in your eager response to the lyrical beauty and idealism of Tennyson. I shall never forget the way you read aloud to me, my strength is a strength of 10 because my heart is pure. Powerful line of Tennyson. But in spite of the fact that I got much of my reward at that time, I want you to know what your note meant to me. I'm now an old lady in my 80s, living alone in a small room, cooking my own meals, lonely and seemingly like the last leaf of fall left behind, or as the old song used to put it, the last rose of summer. You'll be interested to know, Willie, that I taught school for 50 years, and in all that time, yours is the first note of appreciation I ever received. It came on a blue, cold morning, and it cheered my lonely old heart as nothing has cheered me in many years. Well, Dr. Steiger was touched. And after that, every day in November, for years, he would write a letter that day to somebody who touched his life. That's what he did. But the point is this. Gratitude. You got to stop. Stop that fast routine. Stop the busyness and take a moment for your friend, for your family, for that teacher, for somebody that in the armed forces, whatever, that scout leader, that Sunday school teacher, whatever that person was. Could we stop, take a step away of our busyness, and somehow, by word or deed, show our appreciation? That's gratitude. Thrice blessed. Jesus is pleased with us. The person is blessed. And we are blessed in the giving. Amen.